The blue and red lights flashed wildly in the darkness, reflecting off the damp pavement. Deputy Sheriff Travis Wilkins gripped his pistol tightly, his breathing uneven as he aimed it at the man kneeling before him. The man, dressed in a simple Amish outfit, his straw hat tipped slightly forward, did not resist. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his expression calm. Too calm. "You people think you're better than us?" Wilkins sneered, his voice dripping with hatred. "Think you can live your little separate lives without following the same rules as everyone else?" The Amish man didn't flinch. Wilkins bent down, grabbing the man's collar and yanking him forward. "I've had enough of you and your kind thinking you're untouchable." Then the Amish man finally spoke, his voice steady. "Deputy Wilkins," he said, his eyes locking onto the officers with an unsettling intensity. "You're making a mistake." Wilkins let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "That so?" The Amish man gave a small nod. "Yes, because as of this moment, you're under federal investigation." Wilkins blinked, his grip loosening just slightly. "What did you just say?" Before he could react, multiple black SUVs roared into the scene, their tires screeching against the asphalt. Doors flew open, and out poured men in dark suits, their weapons drawn. "FBI! Drop your weapon, Wilkins!" The deputy's face twisted in confusion. "What the hell is this?" The Amish man slowly stood, still cuffed, and with a simple shrug, he revealed what had been hiding beneath the folds of his plain coat. A badge clipped onto his belt. "Special Agent Peter Langley, FBI." The Amish man, "No," the agent said, his voice unwavering. "And you, Deputy Wilkins, are under arrest." Wilkins' face went pale. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had controlled this town for years. He had made the rules. And now the same Amish man he had mocked, humiliated, was standing before him, his true identity revealed. Wilkins reached for his gun, but he never got the chance. The FBI agents swarmed him, knocking him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. "You're done, Wilkins," Langley said as the officers dragged him up. "You're going away for a long time." But as Wilkins looked around, eyes darting in panic, he suddenly grinned. A slow, creeping grin that sent a chill down Langley's spine. "You think this is over?" Wilkins said, his voice low, dangerous. "You have no idea what you just stepped into." And then, as if on cue, boom! An explosion rocked the night, sending a shockwave through the air. Flames erupted from one of the FBI vehicles, throwing agents backward. Sirens blared. Screams filled the night. Langley hit the ground, shielding his head as debris rained down. And when he looked up, Wilkins was gone, vanished into the chaos. And the real hunt was only just beginning. Hours earlier, before the explosion, Langley had been deep in cover, playing the role of an Amish farmer in Lancaster County. He had spent months blending in, earning the trust of the people, gathering evidence against Wilkins and his network of corruption. Wilkins had been untouchable for years. No one could get close enough to expose him. Until now, Langley had finally built a case strong enough to bring him down. The FBI had moved in, expecting a clean arrest. But nothing was ever that simple. Wilkins wasn't just a crooked cop. He was connected, and now he was on the run. Langley pulled himself to his feet, coughing through the smoke. His heart pounded. Who had set off that explosion? Who had helped Wilkins escape? And just how deep did this corruption go? One thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. The air was thick with smoke and the sounds of chaos. FBI agents scrambled to assess the damage, while emergency responders arrived to tend to the wounded. Langley could barely make out the wreckage through the haze. The explosion had taken out one of the FBI SUVs, sending it flipping over and slamming into a nearby tree. Langley's chest tightened as he scanned the scene. Wilkins was nowhere to be found. "Agent Langley!" A voice shouted his name, cutting through the chaos. Langley turned to find his partner, Special Agent Rachel Moore, running toward him. Her face was smeared with dirt and blood, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "What the hell happened?" Langley demanded, his voice gruff. Moore's expression was grim. "We lost him," He disappeared into the crowd during the explosion. It's like he vanished. Langley cursed under his breath. Wilkins had been a snake, and now he had slithered away, slipping through their fingers at the worst possible time. "We need to find him," Langley said, his voice low but urgent. Moore nodded. "I've already sent teams to search the area. But it's not just Wilkins. There's something else going on here." "What do you mean?" Langley asked, his mind racing. "Before the explosion, we intercepted a call," Moore said. "It was a warning, a heads-up. Someone knew we were coming." Langley felt his stomach drop. "Who?" "We don't know yet," Moore said. "But whoever it is, they're connected to Wilkins. And they've been watching us for a while." Langley clenched his jaw. "Great. We're not just dealing with a corrupt cop. We're dealing with an entire network." "Exactly," Moore replied. "And we need to figure out who's pulling the strings before they strike again." Langley's eyes narrowed. "Whoever they are, they're not going to get away with this." As they moved toward the wreckage of the FBI vehicle, Langley's mind was already racing through their next steps. He couldn't afford to waste time. The longer Wilkins and his unknown allies were allowed to roam free, the more dangerous the situation would become. He turned to Moore. "Get the teams together. We're going after Wilkins." Moore nodded. "Already on it. But we'll need more intel. And more backup. We don't know how deep this goes." Langley's mind flashed back to the moment he'd uncovered Wilkins' connection to a larger criminal network. He had suspected corruption, but this was something much more sinister. As they continued their search, Langley kept thinking about the Amish man, the one who had been arrested just hours earlier. His calm demeanor, his easy smile, and the way he had slipped into the role of the perfect Amish farmer. It had all been a cover. But why had Wilkins been so determined to target him? And why had he been so desperate to keep the investigation under wraps? Langley's gut told him there was more to this than just a corrupt cop. The next few hours were a blur of action. The FBI teams combed through the area, looking for any signs of Wilkins or his allies. Langley and Moore worked tirelessly, going over every detail they could find. But every lead they chased seemed to fizzle out. They were running out of time. But then a breakthrough came. A call came through from one of the agents stationed at the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. "Agent Langley, you need to see this," the voice on the other end said. "Where?" Langley demanded, his heart pounding. "Come to the warehouse. We've found something you need to see." Langley didn't waste another second. He and Moore rushed to the car, speeding toward the location. The warehouse was secluded, sitting on the outskirts of town, far from any major roads. It had been abandoned for years, a perfect hiding spot for someone trying to avoid attention. When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. Langley stepped out of the car, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. "This doesn't feel right," Moore muttered under her breath. Langley nodded in agreement. Something about this place felt off. It was too quiet, too empty. They made their way inside. The air was stale, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. At the far end of the warehouse, a group of agents was gathered around a stack of crates. One of them looked up as Langley and Moore approached. "Agent Langley, over here," the agent called, motioning for them to join him. Langley and Moore moved quickly, reaching the stack of crates. As they peered over the edge, Langley's heart skipped a beat. Lying before them, hidden beneath a tarp, was a collection of weapons. High-powered rifles, explosives, and stacks of cash. Langley felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a stash of illegal arms. This was something much bigger. "Where did this come from?" Langley demanded. "Looks like it's been here for a while," the agent replied. "We've been going through the records, and it seems this warehouse was being used as a drop-off point. But by who, we're still trying to figure out." Langley's mind was racing. This wasn't just about Wilkins anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. An underground network of arms dealers, criminals, and corrupt officials working together to further their own agendas. And if Langley couldn't find out who was behind it soon, they would all be in serious trouble. The atmosphere in the abandoned warehouse was heavy. Langley stood over the stash of weapons, explosives, and cash, his mind racing. This wasn't just about Wilkins anymore. The sight before him confirmed what he had suspected all along. This was much bigger than a corrupt police officer. "This doesn't look like a simple arms deal," Moore said, her voice low as she surveyed the warehouse. "There's organization here. Coordination." Langley nodded, his eyes never leaving the piles of dangerous material in front of him. "This is the work of someone high up. Whoever is behind this has connections, military, government, criminal." One of the agents stepped forward, his expression grim. "We've been going through the records, but nothing's adding up. The warehouse was used for a few months, but the owner is a shell company. No one knows who's been making the deliveries." Langley rubbed his chin. "We need to dig deeper. Whoever set this up isn't just hiding behind some fake names. They've got resources, power. We need to track down every lead." As Langley walked around the warehouse, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden call from his radio. "Agent Langley, this is HQ. You need to hear this." Langley grabbed the radio, his heart skipping a beat. "What's going on?" "We've been tracking Wilkins' movements. He's headed to a known safe house. We have a visual on him." Langley's pulse quickened. This was the break he had been waiting for. "Where is he?" The voice on the other end gave the coordinates. Langley's heart pounded as he turned to Moore. "We've got Wilkins. Let's move." Moore nodded, her expression focused. "I'll get the team ready." Langley knew this could be their chance to finally catch Wilkins, but something still didn't sit right with him. This wasn't just about the corrupt cop anymore. The weapons, the cash, the network, it all pointed to something much more dangerous. The ride to the safe house was quick, but Langley couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. His instincts had been right so far, but there were too many moving pieces, and he wasn't sure if he had enough time to figure it all out. As they pulled up to the location, Langley saw that the area was quiet. Too quiet. No lights, no movement. It looked like an ordinary suburban neighborhood, but something felt off. "We need to be careful," Langley said as he and Moore approached the front door, their guns drawn. "Wilkins might not be alone, and he knows we're coming." They moved quickly, checking the surroundings, but everything seemed clear. Langley stepped up to the front door and signaled to Moore. She nodded, ready to breach. Langley knocked once, hard. "Wilkins, open up." No answer. Langley gave the signal to breach. Moore kicked in the door and they entered the house with weapons raised. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. There was no sign of life, no sounds of movement. Langley and Moore moved cautiously, sweeping through the rooms one by one. It was a small, modest house, but it looked like it had been lived in recently. A few personal items scattered about, clothes on the floor, but there were no signs of Wilkins. "Where is he?" Moore whispered, frustration creeping into her voice. Langley scanned the room. He wasn't about to let Wilkins slip through their fingers again. But something wasn't adding up. Why wasn't Wilkins here? And then, as Langley walked past the kitchen, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A small notebook, half hidden under a pile of papers on the counter. Langley picked it up carefully, flipping it open. The first page was a series of numbers, coordinates, times, dates. It looked like a log, but the writing was scrambled, as if whoever had written it didn't want anyone to find it. Moore stepped up behind him. "What is it?" Langley's eyes narrowed. "I think we've found our next clue." They moved quickly, heading back to the car, Langley clutching the notebook tightly. This wasn't just about Wilkins anymore. Whoever had been pulling the strings behind the scenes was still out there. And now, Langley had a feeling they were getting closer to finding out just how deep the conspiracy went. As they drove back to the FBI office, Langley couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. The coordinates, the dates, it was all pointing to something larger. But what, and why had Wilkins run? It was then that Langley's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it, his heart racing. "You're too late. We've already moved. It's time for you to learn the truth." Langley's fingers tightened around the phone. Whoever was behind this had just upped the stakes. And now, Langley realized he wasn't just trying to stop a corrupt officer. He was fighting a shadow war. And the battle was just beginning. The quiet hum of the FBI vehicle's engine was the only sound breaking the heavy silence as Langley and Moore approached the suburban safehouse. The neighborhood was still and unassuming, a far cry from the high-stakes operation that had unfolded just hours before. But Langley's instincts were on edge. Something wasn't right. "Keep your guard up," Langley muttered, his grip tightening around the steering wheel. "Wilkins is gone, but I don't think we're alone here." Moore glanced at him, her face tense. "Agreed. This is too easy. We should have found something by now." Langley nodded, glancing at the small notebook in his lap. The coordinates and dates written inside were too precise to be random. Whoever had been behind Wilkins' corruption had a clear plan, and they had moved quickly to cover their tracks. As they reached the house, Langley parked the car a safe distance away, keeping the engine running. He didn't trust the area. "We move fast," he said, checking his gun. "We go in, clear the house, and see what we can find. Stay alert." Moore nodded, her eyes scanning the neighborhood. "Understood." They moved out of the car, stepping cautiously toward the front door. The house was a single-story structure, unremarkable at first glance. But Langley couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just a facade. Something wasn't adding up. They reached the door and Langley knocked, the sound sharp in the quiet night. No response. "Something's off," Moore said quietly. Langley signaled to her. "Breach." Moore kicked open the door, and they both rushed in, guns raised. The house was dimly lit, its air thick with dust. It felt empty, but Langley's instincts told him not to trust it. He moved cautiously through the rooms, clearing them one by one. Everything seemed too clean, too staged. "Nothing," Moore called from the living room. "Just a couple of chairs and an empty table. No signs of Wilkins or anyone else." Langley's heart sank. Could they have missed him? Then, in the back corner of the room, Langley's sharp eyes caught something. A faint outline of something wedged beneath the floorboard. He moved toward it, his hand brushing over the surface. The floorboard lifted easily with a creak. Inside, there was a small metal box. "Look at this," Langley said, pulling it free. He set the box on the table and opened it, revealing a set of neatly organized files, documents, photographs, and a few USB drives. As he rifled through the files, his eyes widened. The documents weren't just about Wilkins. They detailed a far-reaching conspiracy, connections to illegal arms deals, money laundering, and far more disturbing information. Moore stepped forward, scanning the papers. "This goes way beyond anything we imagined." Langley felt a cold chill run down his spine as he continued to flip through the papers. There were names, dates, locations, all leading back to a single phrase that sent a jolt of recognition through him. "Project Phoenix." "Project Phoenix?" Moore asked. Langley swallowed. "It's a black ops operation. We've been hearing about it for years, but nothing solid has ever come through. They've been working in the shadows, setting up their own network of agents, mercenaries, and corrupt officials." Moore looked at him, her face pale. "Are we talking about government corruption? A whole secret operation running under the radar?" Langley nodded grimly. "Exactly. And Wilkins was just a small part of it. Whoever is running Project Phoenix is untouchable." Moore's voice dropped. "And now they know we're onto them." Langley's phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. He glanced at it, then swore. "It's from HQ," he muttered. The message was short and chilling. "We've lost contact with the backup team. They were compromised." "Damn it," Langley hissed, his mind racing. "This is getting out of hand." He turned to Moore. "We need to get back to the office. We've got a lead on Project Phoenix. But we can't waste any more time. They're making their move." They grabbed the files and rushed back to the car. As Langley started the engine, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The darkness around them felt heavier, like the weight of a storm closing in. "You think we're safe?" Moore asked as they drove back toward the office. Langley's grip tightened on the wheel. "No, we're not safe. And neither is anyone else." They raced through the streets, but as they neared the FBI office, Langley's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. He answered quickly, his voice low. "Langley. Agent Langley." a cold voice said on the other end. "You've been asking the wrong questions. But don't worry, we'll make sure you get the answers you're looking for. Soon enough." Langley froze. He recognized the voice. It was a voice he'd heard before. A voice that had been buried in the darkest corners of his investigation. The line went dead. Langley slammed the phone down. "They know where we are," he said. Moore's eyes widened. "What do we do now?" Langley took a deep breath. "We move fast. We have one shot at this. Let's go." As they pulled into the FBI parking lot, Langley's mind raced. Whoever was behind Project Phoenix wasn't just playing a game. They were making a statement. And Langley knew one thing for sure. It was about to get a lot more dangerous. They stepped out of the car, guns drawn, ready for whatever came next. But just as they entered the building, an explosion rocked the night. The FBI headquarters was under attack. And they had no idea who the enemy was. The explosion that shook the FBI headquarters left Langley and Moore momentarily stunned. The shockwave hit them like a force of nature, knocking them off balance as debris rained down. For a split second, Langley thought the building itself might collapse, the walls rattling violently. "What the hell?" Moore shouted, gripping the side of the car to steady herself. Langley snapped back to reality, his training kicking in. "Get inside. Now." They scrambled toward the entrance, weapons drawn, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The air was thick with smoke, and the sharp scent of burning metal filled their nostrils. Emergency alarms blared, and agents inside the building scrambled to respond, their radios crackling with chaotic commands. Langley could hear shouting in the distance and then gunfire. The building was under attack, and they had no idea who the enemy was. "Stay close," Langley barked, pushing forward. "We don't know how many are in here." The front doors burst open, revealing a scene of complete mayhem. A group of mercenaries, masked and heavily armed, had breached the FBI headquarters. They moved swiftly, taking cover behind desks and overturned file cabinets. One of the agents, already wounded, crawled toward Langley, his face bloodied. "They're everywhere, Langley. We need backup." Langley knelt beside him, checking for a pulse, but the agent was already gone. The intensity of the situation pressed down on him. He wasn't just fighting to stop a corrupt cop anymore. He was facing an organized assault on the heart of the FBI. "They're here for the files," Moore said, her voice steady but tight with urgency. "We have to secure the intel before they get to it." Langley nodded. "Agreed. Let's move." They moved quickly through the building, staying low, making sure to clear each room before moving to the next. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the halls, but it was clear. Whoever was behind this attack had an agenda, and Langley was determined to stop them from getting their hands on whatever was in those files. They reached the central office where the intel was stored. The door was ajar, and Langley signaled for Moore to take the left. He pushed the door open cautiously, expecting a fight. But instead they found nothing. The room was empty. The files, the documents they had been protecting, were gone. "No!" Langley whispered, his heart sinking. "They've already taken everything." Moore cursed under her breath. "How the hell did they know? We were just there hours ago." Langley's mind raced. The attack had been timed perfectly. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. They had been tracking Langley's every move. "They have eyes on us," Langley muttered. "They've been watching our every step." Just then, Langley's phone buzzed again. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered it without hesitation. "Agent Langley," a voice said, low and controlled. "You should have known better than to come after us." Langley's heart raced. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end chuckled softly. "You'll find out soon enough. You've lost, Agent. It's over." Langley's grip tightened around the phone. "You think it's over?" There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice spoke again. "We're only getting started." The line went dead. Langley stared at the phone in disbelief. Whoever had orchestrated this attack wasn't just some group of criminals. They were organized, dangerous, and had resources far beyond anything Langley had encountered. "Who was that?" Moore asked, her voice shaking with frustration. Langley's jaw clenched. Someone who wants us to think it's over. Moore's eyes were wide with realization. They're planning something bigger, aren't they? Langley nodded. Yes, and we need to stop them before it's too late. But as he turned to leave the office, the sound of footsteps approaching stopped him dead in his tracks. They weren't alone. A group of masked mercenaries stormed the hallway, their weapons raised. Langley and Moore had no choice but to dive for cover. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the walls as the mercenaries advanced. Langley and Moore fired back, but the odds were stacked against them. They were outnumbered, and the mercenaries were well trained. "Move!" Langley shouted, grabbing Moore's arm and pulling her toward an escape route. They ran through the maze of hallways, trying to outrun the gunfire, but it was clear they were being hunted. The mercenaries were everywhere, and Langley had no idea how they had infiltrated the FBI building so quickly. They reached a dead end. Langley turned, his heart pounding. There was no way out unless they fought their way through. "Stay close," Langley said, his voice hard. "We make our stand here." Just as they prepared for the worst, a loud crash sounded behind them. The door to the office next door exploded open, and an FBI SWAT team burst in, guns blazing. The tide of the battle shifted. The mercenaries were overwhelmed, retreating as the SWAT team moved in, securing the area. Langley and Moore stood in the middle of the chaos, panting, as the dust settled. "Good timing," Moore said, her voice filled with relief. Langley nodded, but his mind was still racing. "We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to find them fast." As the SWAT team cleared the building, Langley's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from HQ. "Agent Langley, we've received intel. They're moving the files. We have a location." Langley's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" The message came through, "Warehouse District. 24 hours. Langley's gaze hardened. It's not over yet. Not by a long shot. They had one chance to stop this, and they couldn't afford to waste it. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the hallways of the FBI building as Langley and Moore sprinted down the corridor, dodging mercenary fire. The building, once a symbol of law and order, had become a war zone. Agents shouted orders, and the metallic clatter of weapons was a constant in the air. Langley had never imagined he would be fighting for his life inside the very institution he swore to protect. But here he was, his back pressed against the cold wall, his eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. "This is a setup," Langley muttered, his voice tight. "It's too coordinated. They knew we'd come here. They knew exactly where we'd be." Moore, crouched beside him, nodded. "I don't like it either. It's like they've been watching our every move. They're prepared for everything." Langley exhaled sharply. He had suspected this for a while, but now it was clear. This wasn't just about Wilkins. Whoever was behind this attack was playing a much bigger game, and they were using the FBI as a pawn in their scheme. "We need to get out of here," Moore said. "There's no way we can stop them on our own." Langley shook his head. "No, we can't just run. We have to find the intel. If they get away with the files—" "I know," Moore interrupted, her expression grim. "But the whole building is compromised. We don't even know how many mercenaries are in here." Langley's mind raced as he thought of the documents they had uncovered earlier. The files, the photographs, and the details about Project Phoenix, it was all connected. And now the enemies they were facing were after that same intel. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other end of the hallway. A group of mercenaries, weapons drawn, came rushing toward them. They were fast, too fast. "Get down!" Langley shouted. He and Moore dove for cover as the mercenaries opened fire. The sound of bullets whizzing past their heads was deafening. Langley fired back, his aim steady. A mercenary fell, but the others kept advancing. Langley's mind raced. He needed to move, get to the server room, secure the intel, and get out. But they were pinned down. Every step they took was a risk. Moore leaned over and shouted, "I'll cover you. Go!" Langley hesitated, but Moore's eyes were determined. She knew what needed to be done. He nodded. "Stay low. Keep them distracted." With that, Langley bolted, sprinting through the hallway, weaving between the wreckage and debris. He was faster than he had ever been, adrenaline fueling his every movement. The mercenaries were too focused on Moore's cover fire to notice him at first. As Langley reached the corner of the hallway, he took a quick look over his shoulder. Moore was still holding her ground, firing at the approaching mercenaries. She wasn't going to make it out easily. Langley's heart clenched, but he pushed the thought aside. He couldn't afford to think about that right now. He reached the server room. The door was locked, but Langley had already anticipated this. He pulled out his special access keycard and swiped it across the scanner. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was a mess. Papers scattered on the floor, computers hacked, and the servers blinking erratically. It was clear the mercenaries had already been here. But Langley wasn't here for the computers. He knew exactly what he was looking for: the physical backup of the files on Project Phoenix. Langley moved quickly, his hands shaking as he sifted through the drawers. His heart pounded as he pulled out a folder marked "Classified." Inside were more photographs, documents, and a hard drive. Everything they had gathered over the past few months. But just as he reached for it, boom! The explosion rocked the room, throwing Langley to the floor. His head slammed against the concrete as a flash of light and heat consumed everything around him. He heard Moore's voice faintly, calling his name through the chaos. Langley! Langley! But the world around him was spinning. Langley shook his head, trying to clear the dizziness. He pushed himself up, his legs unsteady. The room was a disaster. Debris scattered everywhere, smoke filling the air. Moore! Langley shouted, his voice hoarse. Langley! Moore's voice was louder now, and he could hear her footsteps approaching. Langley stumbled toward her, his vision still blurry. Are you all right? She asked, her face pale but determined. Langley nodded, though the pain in his head was intense. I think so, but we need to get out of here. They're onto us. Moore pulled him toward the exit, but as they made their way down the hallway, they heard the unmistakable sound of boots marching in sync. More mercenaries were coming. They were closing in. We can't go back the way we came, Langley said. We have to find another exit. But as they rounded the corner, Langley froze. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was Wilkins. His hands were raised in surrender, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Langley's blood run cold. Langley Moore, Wilkins said, his voice calm, almost too calm. You've been asking the wrong questions. And now you've crossed the line. Langley's gun was already raised, but before he could pull the trigger, Wilkins smirked, and the building shook again. This time it wasn't an explosion. It was a blast of gunfire from a nearby window, aimed directly at Langley. And everything went black. Langley's head spun as he regained consciousness, a sharp pain in his temple. The world around him was hazy, and the sounds of gunfire seemed distant, muffled as though he were underwater. His vision blurred, then cleared, just in time to see Wilkins standing above him, his smirk as wicked as ever. Wake up, Langley, Wilkins said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. This is where your little game ends. Langley tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, his limbs sluggish. His right hand instinctively reached for his gun, but it wasn't there. Instead, he found himself lying on the cold floor of a dimly lit room, surrounded by the smell of burning debris and gunpowder. Where's Moore? Langley forced out, his voice hoarse. Wilkins shrugged casually. You'll see her soon enough. Right now, though, it's you and me, and we're about to have a little chat. Langley's thoughts raced. The mercenaries had attacked, the building had been compromised, and now Wilkins had him at his mercy. But Langley wasn't finished yet. He took a deep breath, shaking the dizziness from his head. He had to think fast. He couldn't let Wilkins get away with this. What do you want, Wilkins? Langley demanded, still struggling to stay focused. Why do all this? What's your endgame? Wilkins smirked again. Endgame? Oh, you don't get it, do you? This isn't about me. This is about a much bigger plan. A plan that's been in the works for years. Langley's heart skipped a beat. What plan? Wilkins knelt down, his face inches from Langley's. Project Phoenix, he whispered. You've been asking about it for too long. Now you're gonna find out just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Project Phoenix? Langley repeated, his mind racing. What the hell is it? Some kind of covert operation. Wilkins' eyes gleamed with twisted amusement. It's bigger than that. It's a network. A web of corruption, lies, and power. People who pull the strings behind the scenes, making sure the world stays just the way they want it. Langley's breath caught in his throat. You're saying this goes all the way to the top? Wilkins leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. Exactly. And you've been poking at it for too long. Now it's time to clean up the mess you've made. Before Langley could respond, the door to the room burst open, and a team of armed mercenaries stormed in, surrounding him. His heart sank. He was outnumbered, and without his weapon he was vulnerable. One of the mercenaries stepped forward, a tall man with a cold, expressionless face. He crouched down next to Langley, his voice low. You're a problem, Agent. But don't worry. We'll make sure you don't cause any more trouble. Langley's mind raced. He had to do something. He couldn't let them take him, couldn't let Wilkins win. But he was surrounded, and every move he made felt like a risk. Suddenly there was a sharp crack, then another and another. Gunfire erupted from the other side of the building. The mercenaries froze, their attention diverted for a split second. That was all Langley needed. He moved fast, throwing himself to the side and scrambling toward the door. The mercenaries turned, shouting orders, but Langley was already on his feet, ducking into the hallway. The building was a maze of hallways and stairwells, but Langley knew the layout well. He had spent countless hours in these halls, learning every escape route. He had to get to more. She had to be somewhere in the building, and together they had a chance to stop this madness. But as he turned a corner, he skidded to a stop. The hallway was blocked. Standing at the other end were a dozen armed mercenaries, their guns raised, their eyes cold. Going somewhere, Langley? One of them sneered. Langley's heart pounded in his chest. He was cornered. There was no way out. Let me guess, he said, forcing a smirk despite the danger. You're going to kill me? The mercenary grinned. Not just you, Agent. You're not the only one on the list. Langley's mind raced. He needed a way out, and he needed it fast. But he wasn't going down without a fight. In one swift motion, he pulled a small explosive from his vest, the kind used for quick escapes. He activated it and tossed it toward the mercenaries. The explosion rocked the hallway, knocking the mercenaries off balance. Langley didn't waste a second. He sprinted forward, using the confusion to break through the line and head toward the rear exit. But as he reached the door, something hit him, hard. A sharp pain bloomed in his side. He gasped, looking down to see blood soaking through his shirt. He had been shot. Langley staggered, but he didn't stop. He kept moving, pushing himself toward the exit. He had to keep going. Then he saw her. More. She was coming toward him, her face pale but determined, her gun drawn. Langley, she shouted. Move. She rushed to his side, supporting him as they made their way through the back door and into the alley behind the building. We've got to get out of here, Moore said, her voice urgent. Langley nodded, but the pain in his side was intense. He was starting to lose feeling in his legs, but he couldn't stop now. They had to keep moving. Where's the rest of the team? Langley asked, his voice weak. They're scattered, Moore said. The building is compromised, but we have the files. We have the evidence. Now we just need to get it out. Langley nodded, but the world around him was starting to fade. He fought to stay conscious, but the blood loss was taking its toll. Just as they reached the car, a group of mercenaries appeared at the far end of the alley, guns raised. Langley looked at Moore, his eyes hardening. We fight. We don't stop. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The alley was dimly lit, shadows creeping along the walls as Langley and Moore made their desperate retreat. Blood soaked Langley's side, but he refused to slow down. They had no time to waste. The mercenaries were closing in. They could hear the sounds of footsteps behind them, the sharp clatter of boots against the pavement. Moore glanced back, her eyes scanning the dark alley for an escape route. "We need to move faster," she urged, her voice urgent but calm. Langley gritted his teeth. He was bleeding, and the pain was starting to cloud his thoughts, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not now. As they reached the end of the alley, Langley's vision blurred for a moment. His knees buckled, and he nearly collapsed, but Moore caught him in time, steadying him with a firm grip. "Langley, stay with me," Moore said, her voice sharp. "We can't let them catch us." Langley nodded, forcing himself to stay on his feet. They were almost there. The car was just ahead, parked in the shadows at the end of the alley. But the mercenaries weren't far behind. He could hear them getting closer. "Go!" Langley shouted, pushing himself forward with what little strength he had left. Moore was right behind him, her gun raised, eyes darting between the car and the advancing threat. They reached the car, and Moore yanked open the door, shoving Langley inside before jumping in after him. "Get us out of here," she ordered, her voice tense. Langley, still struggling with the pain, started the engine. The car roared to life, and he slammed his foot on the accelerator. The tires screeched as they peeled out of the alley, barely avoiding the mercenaries who had just reached the corner. Langley didn't look back. He couldn't. His head was spinning from the blood loss, and every movement made the pain in his side worse. But there was no time to waste. They had to get to safety, regroup, and figure out their next move. As they sped down the empty streets, Langley's mind raced. The mercenaries were just one piece of the puzzle. They were working for someone. But who? And why had they attacked the FBI? "Langley, focus," Moore said, snapping him back to reality. "We can't keep running. We need answers, and we need them now." Langley nodded, though his thoughts were still scattered. The pain in his side was unbearable, but he had to push through. "I know, but we don't have the intel anymore. They've taken everything." Moore's eyes hardened. "We still have the backup files. They're in the car's glove compartment." Langley's heart skipped a beat. "What? You grabbed them?" Moore nodded. "I did. I wasn't going to let them take everything." Relief washed over Langley, but it was short-lived. The files weren't the only thing at stake. They were fighting against a shadow organization, an invisible enemy with far-reaching influence. The very people who had orchestrated this attack weren't just criminals. They were pulling the strings of powerful people, people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone in their way. Langley reached for the glove compartment and pulled out the folder Moore had mentioned. Inside were documents, classified information on Project Phoenix, photographs, and a few hard drives that contained encrypted data. This was the evidence they needed to bring down the operation. But as Langley flipped through the files, he paused. One of the photographs caught his eye. It was a blurry image of a man in a suit, standing in a dark room with several other figures. The man's face was partially obscured, but Langley recognized something about the posture, the stance. "Moore, look at this," Langley said, his voice low. "This man. I've seen him before." Moore leaned over, studying the photograph. Her brow furrowed. "Who is he?" Langley's mind raced as he tried to place the face. Then it hit him. The man in the photo was someone he had seen during his undercover work. Someone with connections to high-ranking officials. But what was he doing here? "This is bad," Langley muttered. "He's tied to Project Phoenix. He's one of the key players." Moore's eyes widened. "Then we've got him. We have everything we need to expose them." Langley shook his head. "Not yet. We still don't know who's at the top, who's running this operation. And if we don't figure that out soon, we're all dead." As Langley pulled the car into a hidden location, the weight of the situation hit him. They had just uncovered a dangerous conspiracy, one that reached into the highest levels of power. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous the enemy became. "We need to find this guy," Langley said, determination in his voice. "We need to track him down before they come for us." Moore nodded. "And we need backup. We can't do this alone." Langley glanced at her, his face grim. "No more backup. It's just us from here on out." Moore's eyes flashed with resolve. "Then let's get to work." They knew the battle wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The night was thick with tension as Langley and Moore drove through the darkened streets. Their eyes were locked on the road ahead, the car's engine humming steadily, but their minds were a whirlwind of thoughts. Langley's side still burned from the gunshot, the pain a constant reminder that the clock was ticking. They didn't have much time. Langley's grip on the wheel tightened as he glanced at Moore, who was still scanning the area for any signs of a tail. "You sure we're not being followed?" Moore's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, her jaw tight. "I'm sure, but we're not safe yet. We've got the intel, but there's a lot more to this than we realize." Langley nodded, his eyes focused on the road. The files they had stolen from the FBI building were more than just evidence. They were the key to unraveling a conspiracy that spanned far beyond one corrupt cop and a group of mercenaries. It was a massive network, an operation that involved powerful people from both inside and outside the government. Langley's phone buzzed on the dashboard, pulling him from his thoughts. He reached over and answered it without hesitation. "Langley, Agent Langley," came the voice on the other end. It was a woman, her tone cold and professional. "We've been monitoring your progress. You're getting too close." Langley's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" The voice laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't need to know my name. What matters is that you've crossed a line. And now we're going to make sure you never get close to the truth." Before Langley could respond, the line went dead. Moore's eyes locked onto him. "Who was that?" Langley exhaled sharply. "I don't know, but we're running out of time." Just as he was about to speak again, the car jolted, and a loud screeching sound filled the air. Langley slammed on the brakes, sending the car into a violent spin. "What the hell?" Moore shouted, gripping the dashboard to steady herself. Langley struggled to regain control of the car as it skidded down the road. He glanced in the rearview mirror, only to see a black SUV barreling toward them, its headlights blinding in the darkness. "We're being followed," Moore said, her voice laced with panic. "Stay calm," Langley snapped, his mind calculating their next move. He swerved the car to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision with a nearby lamppost. But the SUV didn't back off. It was gaining on them fast. "Get ready," Langley muttered, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Moore was already reaching for her weapon, her hands steady despite the chaos. "I've got this," she said, her voice resolute. Langley floored the accelerator, the car shooting down the road at top speed. But the SUV stayed on their tail, refusing to give up. The tension was unbearable. Langley's heart was pounding in his chest as the seconds ticked by. "We need to lose them," Moore said, her voice tight with urgency. Langley's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. Then he spotted it, the alleyway up ahead. It was narrow, dark, and full of sharp turns. It might be their only chance to escape. Without hesitating, Langley jerked the wheel to the left, sending the car into the alley. The tires screeched against the pavement as they shot into the darkness. "Hold on," Langley shouted as the car bounced over potholes and debris. Moore fired a shot out the window, the sound deafening in the confined space of the car. The bullet hit the SUV's side mirror, but the vehicle kept coming. Langley swerved to avoid a dumpster, nearly losing control of the car, but he fought to keep it steady. The alley was getting narrower, and the SUV was still on their tail. They had to get out of there before they were trapped. "Left," Moore shouted suddenly. "Take the left turn." Langley didn't question it. He slammed the car into the left turn, the tires squealing as they slid into the next alley. But as they made the sharp turn, Langley saw something that made his blood run cold. Another SUV blocking the exit. "We're boxed in," Langley shouted. Moore looked back at the SUV tailing them and then to the one ahead. "We don't have a choice. Fight our way out." Langley nodded grimly, reaching for his gun. But before he could act, the sound of sirens filled the air. It wasn't just one siren. It was a dozen. Langley turned his head, his eyes widening as more black SUVs came racing down the alley, their headlights blinding in the dark. "Move!" Moore shouted, shoving Langley out of the way. She reached for the car's glove compartment, pulled out a set of keys, and started the engine again. The car roared to life and Moore slammed her foot down on the gas. The car lurched forward, but the SUVs were closing in fast. Langley's mind raced as he realized they had walked into a trap. Whoever had orchestrated this, whoever was pulling the strings, had planned for everything. They were surrounded. Langley and Moore were about to find out just how deep this conspiracy went. The narrow alley was a blur of motion, the sound of screeching tires and gunfire echoing in Langley's ears. His heart pounded as he clutched the steering wheel, trying to maneuver the car through the tight turns. The black SUVs were closing in on them from all sides, their headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. "Hold on!" Moore shouted, her hand gripping the dashboard. She turned to Langley, her face filled with determination. "We're almost there. We just need to get past them." Langley glanced at her, then back at the alley ahead. The mercenaries were relentless. Every turn they made, every move they tried, the SUVs stayed on their tail just inches behind. But Langley wasn't ready to give up. He'd come this far. He wasn't about to let them take him down now. "Do you have a plan?" Moore asked, her voice calm but tight with urgency. Langley's mind raced. There had to be a way out. They couldn't keep running forever. Then, his eyes locked onto something. A manhole cover, partially hidden in the shadows at the next intersection. It was a narrow escape, but it might just work. He slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward as they shot toward the manhole. The tires screeched as they hit the intersection, narrowly avoiding the SUVs closing in on them. "What are you doing?" Moore yelled, but Langley didn't answer. With a sharp turn, Langley swerved the car, aiming directly for the manhole. The tires bounced against the metal cover, but the car cleared it, the front wheels lifting off the ground for a split second. Then, with a crash, they landed back onto the street. Langley's heart was in his throat. They had barely made it, but they were through. The alley had opened up into a wider street, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Langley allowed himself to breathe. But the mercenaries weren't done. A loud crash echoed behind them as one of the SUVs slammed into a nearby building. Another mercenary vehicle tried to follow them through the same gap, but it was too narrow. The pursuit was losing ground. "We've got them," Moore said, her voice filled with relief. But Langley knew better than to think it was over. They were still in enemy territory, and as much as they had escaped the immediate danger, they weren't out of the woods yet. "Keep driving," Langley ordered. "We need to find a safe place to regroup." They sped through the streets, weaving through traffic and taking sharp turns to throw off any tails. The night was still young, but the danger was far from over. Langley knew they had to move fast. Whoever was behind this, whoever was running Project Phoenix, wasn't going to stop coming for them. After a few miles, Langley slowed down, scanning the surroundings. They were on the outskirts of the city now, a quiet area with fewer buildings and less traffic. It wasn't safe yet, but it was the best they could do for now. Langley pulled into an empty parking lot, and they both got out of the car. Langley's side still ached, but the adrenaline was enough to keep him going. They needed to figure out their next move. Moore checked her gun, then turned to Langley. "We've got the files, but the people behind this aren't going to stop until they have everything. We need to expose them, Langley. We need to go public." Langley nodded. "We'll go to the press. But first, we need to find the man in the photograph. He's the key to everything." Moore raised an eyebrow. "You think he's the one running Project Phoenix?" Langley met her gaze, his expression hardening. "I'm sure of it. He's one of the key players. And if we can get to him, we can take down the entire operation." But as Langley looked around the parking lot, something caught his attention. A shadow in the distance. Before he could react, a voice called out from behind them. "Going somewhere?" Langley froze, recognizing the voice immediately. It was Monroe. Langley's heart skipped a beat as the man stepped into the light, his hands raised in mock surrender. His smirk was as infuriating as ever. "I thought you were dead," Langley said, his voice low. Monroe chuckled. "Not quite. I always land on my feet, Agent Langley." Langley's grip on his gun tightened. "What do you want, Monroe?" Monroe's expression turned serious. "I think you know what I want. You have the files. You have the information. And now, you're in the middle of something much bigger than you realize. Langley's mind raced. He didn't trust Monroe. He never had. But there was something in the man's tone that made Langley pause. "What's your angle, Monroe?" Moore asked, her voice steady. "Why are you here?" Monroe's eyes flicked between Langley and Moore. "You're not the only ones who've been chasing this thing. Project Phoenix is more than just a criminal enterprise. It's a global operation, and it's been operating in the shadows for far too long." Langley's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? Who's behind it?" Monroe smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You really don't get it, do you? You're in over your head. But maybe, just maybe, I can help you. If you're willing to listen." Langley's mind was spinning. What was Monroe playing at? Why was he suddenly offering help? But before Langley could respond, a loud crash echoed from the distance. "More mercenaries. We don't have time for this," Moore said, pulling Langley back toward the car. "We need to get out of here. Now." Monroe's grin widened. "It's too late for that." And just like that, the battle continued.